Welcome to everybody who's watching. My name is Kim Daniels, and I am the director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life here at Georgetown. We're grateful for so many of you joining us here today. We have over 4,000 of you signed up to watch. We know many more will watch afterwards. So welcome and thanks for joining our conversation. I want to talk about something new that emerged on commencement stages across the country this year. Students greeted people who talked about AI with boos and groans. They sensed correctly that this technology isn't being oriented towards what matters most about being human. And of course, that unease isn't confined to graduates, and it isn't a rejection of technology. It cuts across political divides, and it reflects a question that many Americans are asking. Who is AI for, and who is it leaving behind? So 1 week ago, Pope Leo XIV offered an answer. Magnifica Humanitas, or Magnificent Humanity, is his landmark teaching on artificial intelligence, and it provides not just a diagnosis of what's at stake, but guiding principles that meet the urgency of the moment. And from the beginning of his papacy, Pope Leo signaled his commitment to this issue, choosing as his name a direct reference to Leo XIII, the Pope who during the Industrial Revolution insisted that people must come first, even in the face of economic transformation. With Magnifica Humanitas, Pope Leo XIV has delivered on that commitment. So the question is no longer whether AI will transform our world. That transformation is already underway. The real question is whether that will advance human dignity and whether it will reach workers whose livelihoods are being reshaped and those with no seat at the tables where decisions are being made. Pope Leo's answer is clear. A person's dignity does not depend on what, as he says, they can achieve or produce. He identifies as particularly insidious, he says, any view that suggests a person must earn or justify their own worth. Every person possesses a fundamental dignity that no one can legitimately deny. Magnificat Humanitas comes from one of the world's most significant civil society institutions, with a physical presence in communities around the globe, centuries of on-the-ground experience, and a moral tradition that has been engaging questions of human dignity, labor, and technology since Rerum Novarum and far before. And this afternoon, we've brought together 5 remarkable Catholic leaders to explore what this encyclical means, how it speaks to our moment, and what it calls us to do. I can't think of a better group to help us begin that work. First, Archbishop Paul Coakley is the president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City. Emil Secuda is an Argentinian theologian and the secretary of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America at the Holy See, where she worked closely with Cardinal Robert Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, and was an advisor to Pope Francis. Dan Daly is the founding executive director of the Center for Theology and Ethics in Catholic Health, sponsored by the Catholic Health Association. And he's also the co-host of the podcast Ethics on Call, which has explored the intersection of AI, human dignity, and Catholic teaching. Megan Sullivan is the Wilsey Family College Professor of Philosophy at the University of Notre Dame and is the founding director of Notre Dame's Institute for Ethics and the Common Good, where she leads the Delta Network, a major effort to develop a shared faith-based ethical framework for scholars, religious leaders, tech leaders, and others to discern appropriate uses of artificial intelligence. And Bishop Paul Tai is the secretary of the Vatican's Dicastery for Culture and Education and a leading Vatican expert on AI. He has participated in the Rome Call for AI Ethics and the Minerva Dialogues. He's the former secretary of the Pontifical Council for Social Communications. So throughout this dialogue and conversation with these wonderful panelists, we'll be taking questions from the audience that we'll ask towards the end of the hour. So please follow the prompts at the bottom of the screen to email us your questions. And please also share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag PopeLeoAI and by tagging GUCST Public Life. And now let's get really started. I want to begin with an opening question to all of you. And Bishop Tai, I'd like to start with you. What is the most important takeaway, in your view, from Pope Leo's new encyclical?
I suppose the word that stayed with me was the somewhat obvious word of disarming. It's a quintessential Leo phrase that we've all learned to expect. And he's using it both literally to talk about the disarming of military applications, but more generally, I think, metaphorically, to think about the context in which we are developing AI. AI has this extraordinary capacity to magnify, it has a power to magnify what is best about humanity, what is worst about humanity. And Pope Leo is very clearly wanting us to stay with the idea that we will use AI to address our potential, recognizing some of the fault lines in which we exist. And I think that's the disarming. We have to disarm something of the ethos of competition that bedevils the possibility of us having a healthy development of AI. If AI is being developed in a race for geopolitical influence, for commercial influence, or for destiny, we're in trouble. I think it's also we have to be attentive to the fact that technology has often exacerbated existing inequalities in our society. Again, we have to be attentiveness to ensure that AI will be developed in a way that is inclusive, that is appealing to all. We've seen the breakdown with polarization and the problems that has left through politics. We've seen how AI can make that much worse by developing deep fakes. Again, we have to be an attentiveness to what we do and what we share. And maybe broadly, one of the things that AI can do or technology can do is it can invite us sometimes to step aside, not to take agency, not to take responsibility. And I think this is what Pope Leo is inviting us to do. And not just those of us who may be lucky enough to be in a position to study this question, but generally to think about our responsibility to ensure that there's a proper oversight of the development of AI, that it will be put at the service of all.
Thank you so much for that. Emil, say, how about you? What do you think of as the most important takeaway from this document?
Well, in my opinion, from the point of view of the social teaching of the church, because this is an encyclical from the social teaching of the church, at the beginning of the document, Pope Leo called us to take a decision as a church. That is important. He is not telling us what we must to do. He called to the people of God to take a decision in a critical moment of our history as humanity. And that decision is if we are going to build Babel or if we are going to build Jerusalem. And for that, remember Prophet Nehemiah, he called us to organize the work. And he is not speaking there about workers, about former workers or discarded people. He is calling us to organize the work between us to build again the city of God. To me, that is the most important start that we can wait for this document about the social teaching of the church at the time.
Thank you so much for that. And the reminder that this is really rooted in the social teaching of the church. Archbishop Coakley, what do you see as the most important takeaway from Magnifica Humanitas?
Thank you. I was reminded of something that I once heard when dealing with something new and complex, that is to keep the main thing the main thing. And though this is called Magnifica Humanitas, it's being really proposed and discussed as an encyclical on artificial intelligence. But I think the main thing is the need to keep the human person made in the image and likeness of God at the center of our discernment about these new technologies. So it's not really fundamentally, I think, about the technologies. I think it's really about anthropology, having an adequate anthropology to really address the challenges that are being proposed by these developing and emerging technologies.
Thanks very much. Megan, how about you? What do you see as the key takeaway?
Building on Archbishop Coakley's point, one of the things I think is most beautiful about this encyclical is the answer that Pope Leo gives us to this question, what makes human beings magnificent? I mean, a lot of us, most of our brain share right now is focused on how cool and interesting and terrifying artificial intelligence is. But the Holy Father devotes a lot of time to telling you exactly where your worth resides. One of my favorite passages from the entire document is in 122, where he says, your finitude, when it's truly accepted, it does not diminish us, but it opens us to recognizing the face of God. Indeed, precisely because we experience limits, vulnerability, suffering, failure, we can recognize the inviolable dignity of every person, both of our own and that of others. I think we live in a time where value and worth are so easily conflated with money and power, and that is certainly the case in the debates that we're having right now about the social impact of AI. And Pope Leo really asks us with this encyclical to look at ourselves and to look at others in a completely different frame.
Thank you so much for that. How about you, Dan? What do you see as the most important takeaway?
Well, I'm going to build on Archbishop Coakley and Dr. Sullivan's comments, because I think the most important takeaway is about the human person and really the purpose of human existence. You know, what Leo does in this document is call us back to an understanding of human life that is centered on God's grace. He really recognizes that the transhumanists and the posthumanists have this desire for more, this longing for more. We all have this, right? We never want those special moments with family and friends to end, or those special moments with God to end. We desire something transcendent. But the techno-optimists, you know, that he writes about, these transhumanists and posthumanists, see that they can, you know, achieve that desire for more through technology. But what Leo does is he calls us away from that, what he calls a technological divinization, and contends that grace is the answer for the yearning for more. And he echoes Aquinas in paragraph 28 when he writes, quote, "When we embrace the possibility of transcending ourselves through God's grace, we do not deny our nature, nor do we become less human. Grace completes us, right? It builds upon our nature." So he rejects this technocratic paradigm that says, oh, we can solve every problem through technology, and instead puts technology in its place and turns us back to God.
Thanks so much for that. And that's a great place to send us to our longer conversation now. And Bishop Ty, I'd like to start with you and talk a little bit about why Pope Leo and the Catholic Church generally is concerned with AI and technological innovation at all. That's a question some people are asking. And I know you've been involved in the church's engagement on AI over recent years. So how does the church's leadership here on AI fit within its broader mission in the world?
Well, I think the starting point for me is always the summary going back to Vatican II, where the church realized we share our destiny with other people. We journey together on this world. We can't be exempt from the struggles of our fellow brothers and sisters. We live together. And because AI is something that's going to impact so much what it is to be human, how we live our lives, impact the destiny of so many of our brothers and sisters and of ourselves, we cannot but take it seriously. So that's the background. I think the immediate thing around this one, I've seen it coming, was perhaps I was one of those people who at the beginning of the digital move 15 years ago would have been seeing the potential and seeing the great potential of the digitalization to help human communications, to help us to build a better society. And then we've seen some of the less happy results of that. And I think that led us to be more attentive to what was happening. So about 10 years ago, some people from Silicon Valley approached the Holy See saying, look, AI is coming on again. There's been a few false dawns, but this time something is happening that is going to be quite revolutionary. We don't know exactly what the timescale is, but it's happening and it's going to hugely impact human society. And we would want you to be thinking and helping us to think and reflect on how we ensure that this will ultimately be something that serves the good of humanity and not something that just creates further difficulties. And that was a kind of a lot of listening and learning, accepting the goodwill of many of the people who came to us, coming with different philosophies, different approaches, different mentalities, but who came with a desire to ensure that what they were developing would realize its potential for good. And I think that's important. But in those conversations, I'll be clear, as an old teacher of moral theology, you know, good intentions are necessary, but not sufficient. It's how we work that out together, what it is that we can do together to ensure that the technologies don't fall foul of the existing fault lines in our society, but actually help to give new hope to people who need those benefits.
And that's the problem. Excuse me. Yeah, but I just find it so interesting that people don't expect the Catholic Church to be in conversation with Silicon Valley leaders. And in fact, that's been ongoing for quite a while. You've been at the heart of it. Something that I think people do expect is for Catholics to be talking about what it means to be a flourishing human person, right? That's a question that's been at the center of our faith forever. And it's something our theologian Anna Rowlands talked about at the launch of Magnifica Humanitas.
Yeah.
She framed the central question as that one. What does it mean to be a flourishing human person? How does the encyclical answer that question?
For me, I think that's where the encyclical scores very highly, because going back to about 2018, Henry Kissinger wrote an article about AI saying this is how the Enlightenment ends. And he said the world was never less philosophically and intellectually ready for a technology. And particularly said, although everybody wanted it to be human-centric, personal-centric, that wasn't as easy as it might seem. And I think that's where the church has something to offer in terms of we have developed our Catholic social teaching, our Catholic social doctrine, reflecting on what it means to be human. What are the things that make us flourish as human beings? And that's kind of not an easy question. It's about a balance of different factors. What are the factors that allow each of us to flourish as individuals? What are the things that enable us to grow in community with other people? How do we ensure that our understanding of community is truly inclusive? How do we live in peace with each other in the context of difference? And then Pope Francis put very much on the agenda for us, how do we live in a way that is sustainable in harmony with our environment? And I think that's what the question is for us, is to flesh out those, to think about what it is that makes life worthwhile. When do we find ourselves happy? What are the attitudes, the values, the approaches to life that enable me to find satisfaction, but also that keeps the community alive and vibrant, that enables people to flourish, that passes on an earth that will be worthy of another generation. And that, I think, is something we've had to realize too, is that we need the perspectives of everybody. It's not just, we need the different perspectives, not just one culture's understanding of what it is to be flourishing, but that broader understanding. And I think that's where Pope Leo is inviting everybody to come to the discussion, to bring our insights on what it is to live well, to flourish, not just as individuals, but in community and in harmony with our broader environments.
Thanks so much for that. I think that's one of the distinctive advantages of the Catholic Church in this conversation, is that we are a global institution with physical presences in communities around the world, the most multicultural, multilingual institution in the world. So we do bring this cross-cultural perspective to that understanding. So thank you. Emilce, I want to come to you as our resident expert on Catholic social teaching, Catholic social doctrine for this part of the conversation. We've talked about Rerum Novarum, the predecessor, in a sense, to Magnifica Humanitas, and it responded to the challenges of the Industrial Revolution, just as Pope Leo right now is responding to the AI revolution. What do you think the historical significance of Magnifica Humanitas will be, and the Church's moral voice in this new era? How will that flesh out?
Well, it's curious that when the people around the world is waiting for an answer from us, from the Catholic Church, but especially from the Pope, they are not expecting about economical, political, or technical solution, because we have the expert about that. They're waiting for about moral principles. And in the last decades, in this chain of time, some of our principles of the social doctrine or of the church means other things. So it's interesting that in this document, Pope Leo take in consideration the continuity of the social doctrine of the church to say this is the text, to put the signifier, the real signifier of what it means. For example, social justice. We are in a moment where in some country, we can speak about one of the most important and central principles of our doctrine of the church. And Pope Leo said, social justice for the church, it means this is the signifier. It means this. human dignity is this. Universal access to the common good, this. So this is important because in one part he said the grammatical of the conflict is changing. So he put again, and he showed us how is the real grammatical modality to read the principles of the social teaching of the church. I think this is important because in the middle of this artificial intelligence and the technology and all the new modalities of communication, our new is always the gospel, but through the social discernment. So to go again, which is exactly the means of each of our principles, is something important to take in consideration in times where some of that principles is impossible to repeat in a public context.
Well, I think that's one of the really beautiful parts of the encyclical is the recapitulation of Catholic social doctrine in that first few chapters, right? And the first few chapters, it's really wonderful and a real contribution. I also want to sort of take us back again to Rerum Novarum for a second. When that document really drew the world's attention to the significant inequality that the Industrial Revolution would produce and towards the particular challenges faced by workers at the time. What challenges do you think Pope Leo XIV sees today in this new encyclical, and how does he call us to respond?
Well, this encyclical, of course, always a social encyclical is for everybody, not only for the church. But I think this encyclical is a document to inside the church at the same time. For example, if we pay attention, the three theologians that did the presentation with Pope Leo is important because three of that person show us exactly three important points of these documents. For example, Cardinal Victor Fernandez, he said in one moment, social teaching of the church is not sociology, is theology. So this is a door for all of us to go ahead to speak about our principles without anybody come to call us sociologists or communists or Marxists. The second presentation was Anna Rowland when she said what the common good means. Because everybody speak about the common good, but where is the common good, or which is the common good? And that is at the end of the document, is the Magnificat. The common good is the Magnificat. And the third presentation was from Leo, the theologian from Santa Clara, when she said, the truth is relational, is in the relationship. This is so strong because this debate takes 20 years or more between the theologian in the church. And in the document say, about revelation, one is the truth. But in relationship with the concrete problem, the truth is relationship, is in the relationship. And with this, Pope Leo closed a deep debate. But the big debate is who is the person who can to judge where is the truth or what is the truth. In the reality, everybody in the relationship. So this is in theological terms, this is, in my opinion, a big topic.
Thank you so much. I think that's such a critical and distinctive part of Catholic social teaching, right? Is this focus on relationality, on relationship, how we exist in relation with others, and something that's very distinct in this discussion of AI as well. Archbishop Coakley, I'd love to come to you now. Something I was struck by is that Magnifica Humanitas covers such a broad range of issues: work, truth, war, slavery, democracy, the future of childhood. What do you think is the connecting thread running through all of those issues? And what does that tell us about how Pope Leo understands this moment?
Yes, thank you. it does cover quite a range of topics. But I think it's significant that prior to beginning his reflections on AI, the Holy Father first answers a foundational question, which is, why does the Church have the ability to speak at all? In doing so, he affirms that it is central to the Church's mission to walk alongside humanity, paragraph 18, and be responsive to the contemporary challenges that men and women in every age, and certainly today, are facing. He says she cannot consider herself a stranger to the forces shaping humanity. On the contrary, the Church actively participates in the process by which society grows and is organized, and she offers her own contribution to the creation of a more just and fraternal society. That's in paragraph 19. Importantly, he also makes central, not peripheral, central, the Church's social doctrine, which has already been alluded to, and describes its development over time in a beautiful, succinct, and quite significant manner. Catholic social teachings enshrines a core set of values, he writes, principles including the inherent dignity of the human person, the common good, the universal destination of goods, subsidiarity, solidarity, and of course social justice, which are a living reality, as he says, in dialogue with history, with culture, and the sciences, in paragraph 46. This then allows the Holy Father, Pope Leo, to make application of these principles to the contemporary challenges that AI is posing today, raising questions that activate the consciences of readers. For example, how can the use of the goods of creation and the new possibilities of AI be regulated to respect the environment, to avoid waste, prevent new forms of exploitation? How can decision-making about data management, digital environments, and algorithms be informed by local communities and intermediary organizations? How can we ensure that new ways of working prioritize the worker and his or her dignity rather than simply forcing workers to adapt to mechanization? How can we restrict autonomous weapon systems which displace the human aspect of war, including conscience, personal responsibility, and the recognition of the other as human? What does a just social order look like which guarantees everyone equal access to opportunities, protects the youngest and the weakest members of society, and combats hate and misinformation, and subjects the use of data and technology to public oversight in order to reflect the dignity of every person and the common good of all? So a lot of questions are posed for us to ponder, and he has laid out for us the principles by which we can wrestle with these questions and come to some sort of satisfactory responses.
Thanks so much for that. And I do think that's right. The thread of Catholic social doctrine throughout, right, and seeing all of these principles work together as an integrated whole. Something I was struck by was that it doesn't come from a place of fear, right? This document doesn't come from a place of fear. It comes from a confidence in our teachings, and it comes from a place of hope. And I love that he talks about moral imagination in its context, right? He asks what human flourishing looks like in an age of AI, calls for us to engage in or use our moral imagination. I'm wondering what you think, sort of as bishops shepherd your flocks, how do you help ordinary Catholics, all of us out here, workers concerned about jobs, parents concerned about their children, young people entering a transformed market, economic and labor market? How do you help all of us bring these principles to everyday life?
Well, it would have been easy, of course, on a subject such as this for Pope Leo to direct this encyclical only to the private companies or to the governments that can set policies and establish rules that do or do not have the good of the human person in mind. But instead, what he's doing, he emphasizes the responsibility is everyone's. Parents, for example, can talk to their children about AI and social media. They can monitor their online activity. Schools can and must educate young people to be discerning in their evaluation of the information that they consume, as AI makes it easier for disinformation to be disseminated. As investors, we can insist that private companies develop AI responsibly. As voters, we can demand regulations against the dangers of AI. So we all have a role to play, and Magnifica Humanitas is really, for all of us, a call to action.
Thank you. Thanks very, very much. I appreciate that. Megan, let's come to you now. So at Notre Dame, you and your colleagues at the Institute for Ethics and the Common Good have built this Delta framework around 5 principles, and I find it so helpful: dignity, embodiment, love, transcendence, and agency. You see this as a faith-based approach to AI ethics. Can you tell us how Magnifica Humanitas speaks to that work, and how a framework like Delta can help Catholics and institutions and others translate these principles into concrete action?
Absolutely. And that's a great opportunity to just follow on Archbishop Coakley's comments, because now the real work begins. Now that we have the encyclical, we've got to figure out how we're going to get this teaching out there. In the AI companies, there's this concept called diffusion that they talk about all the time. And diffusion is when the model that they built in their AI lab gets out into society and becomes a part of everybody's day-to-day life. Like, diffusion is what happened November 2022 when ChatGPT got out of OpenAI, and suddenly it's on everybody's phones and it's in everybody's schools. The church, and particularly the church, is teaching about dignity. It now needs diffusion. Like, we've got this beautiful encyclical, but it's got to leave the lab. It's got to leave the Vatican, and it's got to be part of our schools and our communities and our media and our day-to-day life. And it has to be just irresistible. So with the Delta framework, our goal is to be part of that effort to take this magnificent teaching and help it diffuse into our society. As you mentioned, Delta is an acronym. A lot of folks don't know the church's social teaching. They don't know what the teaching is on dignity. And in fact, there are so many people right now that feel a sense of vertigo, that they used to think that what made their lives special and meaningful as a human being was their intelligence, was their ability to solve problems and to make money, to be economically productive. And now they realize, oh my gosh, there's this technology that's just smoking me on those skills. The church says this is never what has made your life valuable. And if we want to quickly and succinctly share the gospel teaching about your dignity, the way we can summarize it is you are an embodied being who is built to love and be loved. You are capable of grasping the transcendent with your mind. Forget about just reading all the prompts that AI feeds you day to day. You have a mind that's capable of grasping the true, the good, and the beautiful, and those really exist. And then finally, you're an agent. You direct your life. You have free will and moral responsibility that you should take very seriously. And if you're a parent or an educator, not only do you have your own agency, but you are actually responsible for forming the consciences of the next generation of human beings. This is work that happens in community. So Delta first is our attempt to just, quickly help people glom on to what the church's teaching is, because as Archbishop Coakley said, it's for everyone. It's not just for Catholics. And now we are actually working very closely with the Lilly Endowment and with a consortium of schools and churches across North America to invest in teachers in schools, in ministry programs in churches, and in efforts with the broader media to help get this teaching diffused, to get it out there, and to help people realize that they have an alternative way of thinking about AI that they might not have grasped before Pope Leo gave us this incredible teaching.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Let's talk about one particular church teaching here as we think about diffusing them into the broader conversation. Magnifica Humanitas insists that work is more than just income. It's part of what it means to be human, right? As AI reshapes how we work, how do we protect this deeper understanding of work, and what role can the church play here?
I mean, you said it at the start of the session, Kim. Pope Leo has been deeply inspired by the first encyclical to ever come out in the Catholic social tradition, Rerum Novarum, which just hits exactly on this question. What does it mean to think that our work is part of our human dignity? And the church has an incredible teaching on this that's, 135 years old and has survived 2 world wars and an industrial revolution, and it's going to absolutely survive the AI revolution. The church says a few things which are surprising in our modern economy. First, work is an essential part of our dignity, because work is nothing more and nothing less than our ability and call to serve the common good. And so we do not want to live in a society where AI has replaced work in that sense. Every human being has a calling and work in that sense. Second, as Pope Leo XIII reminded us, and Pope Leo XIV picks this up, some forms of work express and enhance our inherent dignity, but other forms of work are dehumanizing. Asking someone to change their thoughts and behaviors to mold to the behavior and activities of a machine or a piece of software, that is not respecting the dignity of that particular worker. As we think about the economy that we want to build with AI, one of the things Pope Leo reminds us, which the church has always been reminding leaders of, is we have a choice over our economy. We can allow these deep values to guide the decisions that we make in the companies that we found, and the workplaces that we promote, and the policies that we vote for. And we have the opportunity now to vote for an economy that affirms human dignity.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Dan, let's come to you now. And I'm really excited to have you here with us because you're thinking about precisely how artificial intelligence affects one sector of the economy and one group of Catholic institutions, and that's Catholic healthcare. So Catholic healthcare has always understood care as more than just technical competence, right? It's accompaniment of the whole person. And the Vatican has warned in the past that AI in healthcare can risk worsening the loneliness and isolation that too often come from illness, along with illness anyway. So how do Catholic healthcare institutions protect this holistic vision of care that has been so central as AI becomes more embedded in clinical practice?
So I think the primary way to promote whole person care in AI is by returning to Jesus and his healings in the Gospels, to really remember what Catholic healthcare is and what it's for. Catholic healthcare witnesses to the healing ministry of Jesus Christ. So what was that ministry? Jesus healed by encountering the sick. His healings were relational. They were acts of love and friendship. They weren't merely effective. They were these relationships that he had with those who were sick. So think of Mark's gospel, very beginning of the gospel, when he heals the man with leprosy. Jesus first hears the plea for healing, touches the man, which was completely taboo at the time, and makes him whole again. So that the man with leprosy wasn't just cured of his disease, he is reintegrated into the community. He can now be touched by others. He can now go talk to others. And he becomes an early evangelizer of Jesus. So his healings touch the whole person. If you think about Luke's gospel, Jesus tells his disciples, one of the ways that you're going to spread the gospel is when you go into a town, cure the sick, and say to them, quote, "The kingdom of God is at hand for you." That's Luke 10:9. Jesus invites his followers to proclaim the kingdom by healing the sick. So Catholic healthcare has to be a sign that God loves all persons, especially those who are poor, sick, disabled, suffering, rejected. So this culture of encounter and accompaniment needs to be animated by Christ and is sacrosanct in Catholic healthcare. What does this mean practically? I think practically it means that human healthcare professionals must remain the norm. AI can augment the care that humans provide, but must not replace them, because artificial intelligences can't care for patients. They can't do the works of mercy. They can't express empathy, as Leo writes. They cannot witness to the healing ministry of Jesus. And what's so interesting is that doctors and nurses aren't the only ones who provide whole person care in Catholic healthcare. There was a really interesting study in 2022 that showed that custodians and orderlies provide high levels of emotional and relational care to patients. They are bulwarks against patient loneliness. So they can't be easily replaced by AI if Catholic healthcare is to continue to accompany those who are sick and suffering.
Thanks so much for that. It feels like I know whenever someone in my family is suffering from an illness, that it's all the people around, all the people supporting that really make that difference. And it's something very distinctively human. So thanks for pointing that out. I want to take it out a little bit more of a systemic conversation. How do you think AI might both either improve or worsen the existing inequalities in healthcare here in the US, but also around the world? And does Pope Leo speak to this at all in Magnifica Humanitas?
He does. And I think Leo would grant that if rightly designed and employed, it could reduce inequalities. So we could have home health monitoring that allow rural patients or patients in areas with low hospital and physician densities to receive treatment and be monitored. AI could allow marginalized communities to access expert level care in areas like radiology. AI translation services may help patients who speak languages other than the dominant language in the area to communicate and have their concerns be listened to. And if AI does make healthcare more efficient, this may enable healthcare organizations to expand access to care, right? Get rid of the inefficiencies, put those resources to expanded access. But notice my choice of the conditional here. This could happen. And as Dr. Sullivan just said, this would be a choice, right? These are choices. We will choose what kind of an AI we have to design AI to benefit patients who are not revenue generating, right? That's the key. These are not patients who generate revenue or don't generate revenue at the scale that other patients do. The default position, unfortunately, is that AI benefits accrue to the privileged, the wealthy, those with access to high quality care, an electronic health record, high-speed internet, wearable devices, those who generate revenue. And Bishop Ty's, dicastery co-authored Encyclical Nova, and I urge people to go read paragraph 76, where they make this very point about AI in healthcare, that it could be incredibly unequal. Now, in one of the most important passages of the encyclical, Leo rejects the techno-optimist dogma that AI will produce a rising tide that lifts all boats. And he writes in paragraph 161, and I'll quote it because it's important. While some regions spend heavily on superfluous interventions or dreams of individual enhancement accessible only to a select few, other parts of the world lack the essential equipment needed to save millions of human lives. To think that new technologies will automatically benefit everyone is to ignore the evidence, end quote. So it's a profound injustice that while the privileged are working to leverage AI for human enhancements and even a post-human future, others starve, they die of preventable and curable diseases, live stunted and diminished lives. Now, AI could address these problems, again, if we choose. And what Magnifica Humanitas underscores is that God intends the goods of the earth and all cultural products, including AI, to benefit all persons, especially those who lack material goods needed to survive. This perspective that Leo has articulated in this quote and throughout the document is nearly absent from the AI discourse and constitutes a profound contribution of the Pope to that discourse.
Thanks so much for that. I like especially two things. First, your focus on our agency, right? Our responsibility as individuals, as citizens, to be involved in these decisions, to make sure that we make them priority decisions for us in our communities, in our roles as citizens, et cetera. But also on this idea of the preferential option for the poor and the idea that those who don't have a seat at the table, the most vulnerable, should be at the center of our conversation, right? And that is, again, something that I think Pope Leo is bringing very distinctively to this conversation. Emilce, can I ask you to talk a little bit more about Catholic teaching on the preferential option for the poor? I know that in this document, there's discussion of solidarity, subsidiarity, and the option for the poor is kind of woven throughout. Can you talk a little bit more about it for people?
Yes. When I listened your question, I was thinking in the famous song, Another Pick in the Wall, because the Pope said that. He said, each of us are important. We need everybody to build the wall. Each of us can to put a pick in the wall. And this is important because it's not only for experts, it's not only for academic people, scientific, big entrepreneurs, no. Because we must to do an option. We must to take a decision. And this is not for to wait how the important people, the presidents, the professors, the bishops, cardinals, waiting what they are going to do. He said, he called each of us in the name of Jesus Christ resurrected. He started the document in the introduction speaking about Jesus Christ, the resurrected, and he ended with that. And he called each of us, poor, rich, intelligent, kids, all people, to work, to organize the work, to organize the work and to say amen. This is important. This is an important part at the end of the document. In the conclusion, at the beginning, he called us to take a decision. But at the end, he said that each time, in the moment of the Eucharistic, when we say amen, we are taking again the decision. And that decision is to become a builder of a new city. And
Thank
poor
you.
are included, of course.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. Paul, I want to come to you now with a question. You know, it was so interesting to me that Pope Leo was personally present for the launch of this document. It's a first in modern Vatican history, of course. Why did his presence matter, and what was he trying to communicate, do you think?
Personally, what I felt was his presence there was a clear sign of this is my concern. From the beginning of his papacy, he said, this is my issue. This is the issue I want to put on the line. And I think that was important. What was particularly, I felt wonderful was he was doing this in his own voice. We really rarely hear the Pope speaking English, but there was that lovely command and himself emerging. His commitment to the message was very clear. Then actually the text of what he said, I've been using that text. Not all my friends and family are likely to read the whole encyclical, but I've been kind of saying this is where you start. This is really a wonderful synthesis of the text, and then actually will help as a guide or accompaniment as somebody might engage more fully with the text. That for me was a complete bonus. But then I think above all, it was the symbolism. He's calling in the encyclical for all people to come together, to walk together, to have the conversations that are necessary, to ensure that the full and complete human community is engaged. And I think his own presence there among theologians, among church figures, and with the world of technology was the very powerful statement of that. That lovely exchange at the end where he did say to Chrysola, look, we will be taking you up on this offer to walk together, to talk together, to develop together, and to use this moment. It won't always be an easy conversation, but it's a conversation that he's happy to have and that he's leading by example by his presence there. That for me was the wonderful bonus of his presence.
And again, such an example of confidence and hope, right? That we're not afraid of this conversation. We're a part of it. I thought that was wonderful. Thank you.
I thought it was, yeah, I mean, it was probably high risk, but I mean, it's the photograph that speaks so much around the place. And for a younger generation, there's something there that says this is a Pope who is, you know, getting involved in the first hand, not hiding behind all the inevitable protective mechanisms we have in the church, but is leading in his own voice and in his own person. And I think that is an example and encouragement to all of us, depending on our own capacities and abilities. And that comes out in the document where he says he wants everyone, no matter who they are, to think about, reflect, and think from their perspective what they can bring to this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Archbishop Coakley, I'd love to come to you now. It's been over a week now since the encyclical was released, and there's been so much commentary about it and so much sort of reaction among the public as well. What do you think has surprised you the most about this reaction?
Well, I tell you, I think our Holy Father, Pope Leo, in his wise discernment as a good shepherd, good pastor, connects with what all of us, whether we are believers or unbelievers alike, at our very core, understand and know instinctively to be true, and that is that the human person possesses an ontological and infinite dignity, and therefore must be at the center of all of our deliberations and debates, concerns about AI. That's the center and heart of it. And I think this is a message that really does resonate. Concern for the violation of this dignity resonates as well. I think people are concerned about what's happening now and what they envision or fear might happen in the future. There is an appreciation, I think, for Pope Leo bringing in this essential lens to the conversation, which has the ability, I think, to activate, as I said earlier, the consciences of all who create, all who regulate, all who use, or all who are impacted by artificial intelligence.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Megan, so first of all, to everybody watching, we are opening it now to audience questions. So please send your questions in, and we will try to fit them in here for the folks on our dialogue. We have a lot of questions coming in, so I won't be able to get to all of them, but I really appreciate you sending them, and we'll do our best. Megan, I want to bring one to you, and that's this idea of moral atrophy, right? With the use of AI, that in some way we become desensitized to using our own moral judgment. Can you talk a little bit about that concept and how we might protect against that?
Yeah, so I think this is a big risk, and it's one that we in the church are going to have to pay close attention to. The promise of artificial intelligence is that it gives you information at the snap of a finger, and that it will make decisions on your behalf. Like, you're going to pay a subscription to these AI companies for an AI that's going to do a bunch of tasks for you that you don't want to do. And we realize in the faith that your conscience, it's like a muscle. You develop it over time as a small child, hopefully in a loving family and community. But if you don't use it, you can lose it. Or if you misuse it, if you don't receive the sacraments, if you don't scrutinize and live an examined life, you can start to lose that conscience that you've worked so hard to cultivate. And two of the key skills for developing a moral conscience are encounter and discernment. Encounter, just seeing the actual face of other human beings with dignity, being with them and among them. Discernment, taking some time out every day for prayer, for reflection, for the ability to think about the state of your soul, to be able to ask for forgiveness, to ask for help. And AI is a distraction, a serious distraction from both of those skills. I think one of the key things that we will need to do as a church, especially as AI becomes omnipresent in our culture, is be one of the institutions that reminds people that encounter and discernment are still possible, and shows them how to do it, how to live this out, because AI is not capable of teaching users how to do this.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. I think that idea, right, that we learn through encounter, through our embodied relationships with others is so important, and one we'll be learning more about as AI becomes more a part of our everyday lives. Dan, we have a good question here from someone who asks about kind of how we do this in institutions, and you're in an institutional setting yourself. Yes, how can administrators of Catholic-related institutions, so whether it's universities or hospitals or schools, best ensure that the message of Pope Leo's new encyclical explicitly informs their business practices when they may be experiencing lots of competing demands, of course? How does that conversation go on in Catholic healthcare? What do you think about that?
It's such an important question. I mean, we don't want this to be a dead letter. Even if people read it and agree with it, it has to be integrated into organizations. And so really, when you think about an organization, there are two aspects that we need the document to push into. The first is the culture of the organization. What are the ideas that we endorse and enforce? So read this document and think, how does this change the way we think about what we do, why we do what we do, what our goals are, how we impact certain kinds of persons, especially people who are vulnerable and marginalized, right? Leo is raising up those concerns for us. So we've got to have a culture that draws on the document. So read the document, talk about the document, endorse the document. The other is the structure, and structure is essentially about people and policies. Do we have the right people in place and positions to be able to implement the document? Do we, when we think about AI in healthcare or in education, do we reward people who implement the teachings of the document? Do we see that as an important part of their job? Because unless and until you value what you reward and you reward what you value. And if we don't reward what we value, this document will never find its way into these organizations. So we need people, we need different kinds of positions, the way we describe those positions. And then we need policies that reflect the insights of the document. And so it's culture, it's on the level of ideas, but it's also on the level of that structural organization and how we understand what we're doing, why we do it, and how frankly, how we reward people for what they do. Do they follow the teachings when they use AI? I think that's an essential way of getting the document to be alive within any organization, whether it's healthcare or otherwise.
Thanks so much for that. We have a question coming from an educator, from a chaplain at a Catholic high school. And Paul, I think I'll send this one to you first, and then maybe you, Megan, both of you educators. He asks, he's a chaplain, he's a teacher himself. How do we form young people to recognize the difference between truth and misinformation? And what concrete steps should educators be taking right now? Paul, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm a rusty educator. It's quite a while, but I'm very happy to think about it. But when I was teaching, a lot of the things that you had to do, particularly as a chaplain, was a lot of our core truths, the things that really matter, are not intellectual in a sense. It's a way of living, it's a path of living. And I think the first thing we need to do is give our young people an experience of living in service of others, that they discover the joy, the happiness that comes from being people who reach out towards others, to find that it's in our nature to love and to care for other people, and to find that vindicated in their own experience. And that, I think, creates a sensitivity to the value and worth of other people. The real danger I see with misinformation is if we begin with, forgive the word, a hermeneutic of suspicion. If we're kind of doubting everybody we meet, if we're thinking the worst of them, if we're seeing them as an enemy or as a threat, then we are predisposed to believe what is wrong about them. I think what we need to begin is by helping people to make that jump of imagination, to see the goodness and the humanity in other people, that then will condition how they take the information that they're receiving, and learn them to be more critical in their evaluation of that information. And I think that will be a huge thing more formally in education, is teaching the critical skills to young people that enable them to understand the dynamics that create false news and be able themselves in position to vindicate things and prove them for themselves. But that is always a matter of the heart as much as the head.
Thank you. How about you, Megan? What do you see?
Yeah, I teach at a big Catholic university, and this is just as big of an issue at universities as it is in high schools right now. I think about the analogy of good food. So suppose you got a young person and they really like junk food, and you want to try to convince them that there's something better that they could be putting into their bodies. One strategy is to just constantly berate them every time they go to Taco Bell and tell them it's bad. And if you've spent any time around emerging adults, you will realize that does not work. They will just eat even more. But another approach is to lovingly take them to a really nice dinner, like take them to a 4-star restaurant and just show them what good food tastes like. They might not have had it. That might be why the Taco Bell seems so seductive. And I think with truth and misinformation, especially with emerging adults and with young people, one of the most important things that we can do as Catholic educators is have some 4-star dining in our classrooms. Like, let's really expose these young people to things that are objectively beautiful. objectively true. And part of what we believe in our faith is that the truth and beauty and goodness are going to call out to a human soul. Right now, so much of our educational framework is just piling information and tests on young people. And it's just one thing after another. There's not that kind of moment to savor things that are really true and beautiful. And I think we're going to realize that one of the best ways that we can cultivate the desire for truth in anyone, including ourselves, is by creating time and space to be exposed to it, and not spending all of our time just playing whack-a-mole with the junk food.
Can I follow up with you on that? Because I want to sort of ask whether whether this you find this potentially true in your experience. It seems to me that people are having a renewed attraction to things that are distinctively human, distinctively true, distinctively beautiful. That when we're faced with AI slop, when we're faced with something that looks too perfect on the one hand, or too inhuman is the word I'm going to use on the other, that we have a reaction against it, and it almost there's a way in which it might call people back to what's human. What do you think about that? Or is that just being overly optimistic when, sort of the overwhelming force of this is going to be driven by larger forces?
No, I think it's absolutely true. I'll give you a really quick example from my own life. I'm super educated nerd. My middle brother dropped out of high school, and he lives a very, very different life than I'm. He's working class like my parents. We have very different day-to-day lives. And you might think in America right now, we would have huge divisions that separate us. 2 weeks ago, I was visiting him and we were reading a goodnight story to my little 4-year-old niece. We were reading The Velveteen Rabbit, this absolutely beautiful story about, what it means to be real and the role of limits in our lives. And we get to the passage where the rabbit's like learning this truth. And me and my brother just started crying. Like we just bawl. And it's because something deeply true and beautiful like that also has the capacity to bring us together. Like it really transcends all the silly divisions that we live with right now. And I think the exposure, the truth will just hit you in the gut if you really allow yourself to be around it. And we certainly believe that in our faith, and we need more of those opportunities in our Catholic classrooms and universities, and people will respond. Then let the Holy Spirit finish the work.
Thank you. Archbishop Coakley, I'd love to come to you on this generally. Speaking as a pastor, I'd love to ask you as a pastor, because, that's the heart of who you are. And if you were at a parish right now, how would you think about bringing what we've been talking about to that parish, the true, the good, the beautiful in this particular time and moment that we're in? We have a question here from a parish priest who kind of says, what can I do practically? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I was thinking about as we were just listening, the true, the beautiful, and the good, to expose young people to that in so many different ways. But one important way is, I think, through exposure to the natural order, the natural world. Is part of the exposure for parish priests or educators, teachers, exposing young people especially to nature, taking them out of the virtual world, encountering the real. I had a professor in college who used to say, rocks are hard and water is wet. That's real. But you would never know that if you were, just living, through your screen. So I think exposure to the real world, the natural order, I think is an important thing to introduce young people to, so that they can recognize the contrast between reality and virtual reality, for example, and authentic human intelligence and artificial intelligence.
Almost a celebration of what's real, what's true, what's out there. I think that's really a way in which we can, again, lots of questions about young people, and I think there's just a lot to say about being in the real world and experiencing it. That it's really important for us as Catholics. Emil, say we have a question coming in from a good friend of the initiative who asks about CST in the document and Catholic social teaching, Catholic social doctrine, as the document refers to it, and says there's so much richness here. There's so much to it. And it really brings Catholic social doctrine to an enormous range of issues, and it shows the maturity of our Catholic social tradition in a sense. The question is it developing Catholic social teaching? And I think there are some spots in there. Do you want to talk anything at all about how that development is occurring, or what might be moments of development in the document?
Well, it's not something new. Sorry. It's not something new. It's the same, and it's important because, in my opinion, some people is waiting for another principle. For example, because we are in another time. But as we were listening here, we continue being the human being incarnate with the same with the same reality. And in my opinion, in my personal opinion, we must to wait something new from the social teaching of the church in relationship with the principles. The new is in the decision, because the method to do the discernment, and the discernment about the social problems is to see or to listen, to judge, and to act. So the discernment is always in relationship with the gospel, with the tradition of the church, and with the magisterium. But the moment to act, it is the conclusion in a practical logic argument. The conclusion is to act. And that is new. That is new all the time. In different situations, we have the same principles, but the new is our decision. Which is our decision to attend the new reality. And we must to take the decision. This is important. Maybe in my bad English, it's not easy to understand. But in my opinion, the new is that the Pope is calling us to do that conclusion. He is calling us to take the decision, because the discernment is in the chapter 2 and chapter 3, where he, in a synthesis, presents again what each principle means for the church. And in relationship with that foundation, each of us, as free people, from our sensus fidei, we must to take the decision. And that is the new and the news. This is important because this is the core of the social teaching of the church. We are free. When we said amen, it's our decision. He is calling us to say amen, but not, and he speak about this, but not in a devotional sense, in a concrete sense. That is la novedad, decimos in Spanish. That is the new. We must to take the decision. This is, in my opinion, the jewel of the document.
I love it. I love it. The idea that, again, it calls us to use our own freedom, our own agency, to act as citizens, to act in our communities, in our parishes and schools, in our families. And I think that's really important. This is a document addressed to all of us. Dan, we have a very practical question, and it builds on something that you talked about. But it's I want to read it because I think that I'd love to hear you respond. There's a way in which having sort of robots, AI tools or systems in a healthcare context can speed things along. This person says, have you been in a hospital room lately, tried to call somebody and you're not able to get them fast, right? But sometimes it takes a long time to get a response. What are the kind of practical ways that you can mesh this experience of using artificial intelligence systems to complement human beings in a healthcare setting?
Yeah, so I think it's entirely true that healthcare has enormous challenges. One is a workforce challenge. But I would say that the solution to that isn't AI-powered robots. It's training more human healthcare workers. It is providing that kind of personal care. You know, a robot could potentially perform some functions. I'm not saying that there's no room for them. I'm saying that they can't replace the kind of care that is necessary in a Catholic healthcare institution. You know, AI may help us to create better working conditions for these folks that'll draw more people in, right? That would be wonderful. But we still need human beings to provide that healing, encounter, and accompaniment. You know, what I was articulating is there's a theological reason here. The reason that human beings must do this is because this is what God has asked us to do. We cannot outsource this to robots. Even if they're effective, and even if they're flawless, right? If we just grant the premise that we're going to have these flawless AI doctors and nurses, care still must be provided. What that looks like, I don't know. You know, I'm not a prognosticator, but I do know there will never be a replacement for these folks in Catholic healthcare if Catholic healthcare is what it's called to be.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. One last question, and then we're going to do a wrap-up question for all of you. Paul, I'd like to take this to you. Somebody asks, how do we what do we think about Pope Leo's direct messages, if you will, or what is he saying to regulators, right? Or legislators or regulators? What's the message of the document for regulation, for legislation?
I think Pope Leo is very conscious of the environment in which we live, and this is a technology that, unlike so many technologies in the past, is being developed by large commercial firms that very often are more powerful in certain ways than nation states. And we're also dealing with this at a time when multilateralism is weak, recognized by Pope Leo. But at the same time, I think he's saying to those as legislators, without telling them what to do, saying they have a responsibility to develop a sense of oversight, to hold people accountable, to ensure that there is appropriate oversight in these contexts. I think more importantly, what Pope Leo is perhaps doing, and it's a bit like Pope Francis on Laudato Si, I think what Pope Leo is doing is creating a constituency of people who will be informed and who will support legislators who have the courage to challenge the interests of big companies and try hold them to accountability and to try ensure that the work they're doing is truly in the interest of the global community and of the local level in so many areas.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And now let's just wrap it up. And Megan, I'll start with you. I'd love to talk about, I was struck by how at the launch, Pope Leo talked about signs of hope, the idea that people from different backgrounds and perspectives can listen and discern together. Bishop Ty has already referred to that. Where do you see that kind of hope taking root right now?
You know, I'm broadcasting from Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I'm at a meeting today and yesterday with a bunch of people who work in frontier AI labs and a bunch of researchers who study these AIs. Next week, I'm going to San Francisco for a similar meeting. And I presented on the Encyclical this morning, and so many people, dozens of people came up to me afterwards and they were like, oh, that's what's in the Encyclical? Like, that's what I'm thinking about AI. They're seeing themselves and their values in this teaching, even if they're pretty distant from organized religion or from the Catholic Church. So I really do have hope that with this teaching, the church can become a refuge for people that just want a new way of thinking about this technology. And I think it's already happening. There's a remarkable openness, and I just hope that that continues to spread.
I've seen that openness too. It has been remarkable. Archbishop Coakley, how about you? Where are you seeing signs of hope right now?
Well, you know, obviously we're in a time of intense polarization here in our country, our nation, and our world. I'm reminded that in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis called for the church to lead the way through a better kind of politics rooted in fraternity and the common good. And Pope Leo references and builds on this invitation, which is consistent with the work of synodality. This is a vision applicable to the specific challenge of AI, but also to our everyday existence in a politically polarized world. Instead of dehumanization, as number 15, paragraph 15 says, ours is the pressing duty to remain profoundly human, True progress always stems from a heart open to others, and intelligence willing to listen, and a will that seeks what unites rather than what separates. And he continues saying, with the heart of a shepherd and a father, I ask everyone to abandon the construction of yet another Tower of Babel and to join forces in building up the common good so that humanity will never lose its beauty and the world once again will come to recognize the human heart as the place where God desires to dwell. So Magnifica Humanitas is the call to dialogue, to collaboration, and to work to ensure the protection of the human dignity. That protection of the human dignity is in the midst of development of world of new technologies. This is work that cannot be done in isolation. Together, it is the only way forward. Again, to return to those images that are at the very center, the wall that is being built in Nehemiah that involves everybody rather than the Tower of Babel that is a willfulness of individuals.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for that. What a profound sign of hope, right? Working for the common good, working for a better kind of politics. Emil, how about you? Where are you seeing signs of hope in response to this document?
Well, the Pope himself is a sign of hope. In this critical moment, the people inside the church and outside the Catholic Church are waiting for the Pope, what the Pope is going to tell all of us, which will be his next step. What is his answer to the journalists? And that is because the people respect the Roman pontificate, and that is the church. So as always, the church, a body of Jesus Christ, is the best sign of hope that we have. And our church has a pontificate, and he is a sign of hope for people who believe in Jesus Christ and for people that maybe is not part of our church, but is part, of course, of the people of God. We believe in that.
What a tremendous sign of hope Pope Leo is, for sure. Dan, how about you? What do you see as a sign of hope in reaction to Magnifica Humanitas?
So the Pope's use of the word hope is key. Hope is a virtue. Optimism is not. The thousands of people on this call are a sign of hope, I think. The public is not uncritically assenting to AI optimism. And young people in particular, to go back to how you opened with the commencement address, the booming at the commencement addresses, young people in particular are becoming the protagonists, not the victims of AI.
Thank you. Bishop Ty, please wrap us up here. What do you see as a sign of hope taking root?
Well, I think the Pope himself very early on says it's not enough for people just to hope for the best. He's inviting people to get active, to be involved, and he's rooting that, though, in a wonderful gesture of his hope in the dignity of the human person, on the capacity of human beings, despite our flaws, our failings, and our histories, to actually reach beyond ourselves in love and to find a better way of living together that will, I think, and can enable us to help this technology achieve its potential. That's my hope. And I think he's resonating. We're picking it up. People are rejoicing in that message.
What a great place to end our conversation. People rejoicing in the message of Pope Leo here. And I think that's right. I want to preview an upcoming dialogue that we have online. It's an online public dialogue on 250 years towards racial justice, progress, promise, and challenge on Monday, June 15th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Bishop-elect Robert Boxey will be joining us as well as others. And you can find more information about that on our website. This discussion was recorded and it will be posted on our website and social media channels for later viewing. And of course, you can see follow-up resources as our site as well. I want to thank everyone who helped put this conversation together, especially my colleagues Kim Mazik, Chris White, Anna Gordon, Christian Sunan, and Blaine Bieni. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. And please join me in thanking those of us here on the panel: Archbishop Coakley, Emil Sekuda, Dan Daly, Megan Sullivan, and Bishop Paul Ty for being a part of this conversation. Thank you all very much.